Hey, what's going on, guys? Brian here. So today we are going to go over a theoretical parts list. So what parts would you buy if you're going to put together a RTX 3070 system? And this is what I would put together. Now, it's not the cheapest build you're going to ever get. It's my ideal build. Like, what system would you actually want to surround the 3070 when it comes to making sure you have nice quality components, a nice quality motherboard, nice quality power supply, all that good stuff. Because, you know, if you've watched any of my videos, I'm all about quality. I don't like skimping on certain components, and I'm not going to for this system. This is the ideal system that I would suggest, like the minimum that I would suggest you get if you're going to put together a 3070 build. So starting with the CPU, we have the Ryzen 5 3600. It's a 6-core, 12-thread monster of a CPU, 3.6 gigahertz base clock, and then it boosts up to 4.2 gigahertz. And with this chip, you get great single and multi-core performance for gaming or for productivity or for whatever you want. It's a great chip all around. I've suggested it tons of times. And for this type of system, that's like the minimum chip I would suggest. Now, you could bump it up to like a 3700X if you want the extra 2 cores and 4 threads. So think about it for a second. You know, you're going to surround the 2080 Ti. Would you have surrounded that with a 6-core 12-thread processor? Maybe, maybe not. You know, so you can see both of them. So 3070 I could also see for this build, but the 3600 right now is going about $180 right now in my area. So that's what I would suggest for your processor. Moving to your CPU cooler, for this build, I put the Arctic Freezer 34E Sports Duo. I think for $50, it's one of the best coolers you can get, and it cools really well for the 3600. It's a little overkill for the 3600. If you want to get something like the Hyper 212, that'll be perfectly fine as long as you're not planning on overclocking your chip. Even the Freezer 34, I think it can handle a little bit of overclocking for the 3600, but not a whole ton. And I would also suggest you can get either the Duo or the non-Duo. The performance difference is very little. I did a review on this a few months back, and the performance between the Duo and the non-Duo isn't very much, so you could save yourself a couple bucks if they have it available for a little bit cheaper. And again, you can also get like the Shadow Rock 3 if you want something really quiet. So you can get the Hyper 212 Black Edition, like I just said, RGB version. There's a lot of different coolers out there that you can actually try with the 3600, and it'll give you like the cooling that you would need for that kind of chip. If you jump up to the 3700, you know, you probably want to spend a little bit more money on the cooler as well to get just like a higher performing cooler to keep your chip nice and cool. So for the motherboard, I went with the ASRock B550M Pro 4. So for the motherboard, in general, for this kind of build, I would suggest spending between $115 to $150 at a minimum for a system that you're going to be throwing something like a 3070 in. Now, the reason why I'm suggesting B550 or X570, if you can find a good quality, affordable board at X570, that's fine too. The reason why I'm suggesting it is for two reasons. So the first one is going to be PCIe Gen 4. Now, there's a lot of arguments throughout the community whether or not the 2080 Ti was able to saturate PCIe Gen 3. I'm not going to get into that argument right now, but if the 3070 is faster than the 2080 Ti, which we are, you know, supposedly it is, but we don't know for sure until reviews actually come out, that means the same argument will be held for the 3070. It's safer and it's better to just get a PCIe Gen 4 motherboard. This way, if it does saturate Gen 3, you have a Gen 4 motherboard. You don't have to worry about that. So that's my suggestion for the 3070. Make sure you get a B550 board. Okay, there's a lot of different options out there, a lot of good affordable ones too. The ASRock B550M is probably the cheapest one I would suggest going for. Gigabyte has like $130. I think it's the B550M Aorus Pro, I think it is. It's a pretty good board too. It's like $130. There's the Bazooka, MSI Bazooka. These are all like MATX boards, but there's really good affordable options for this kind of build. You have the ASRock B550M Tough, that's around $150. You have the MSI B550M Mortar, that's around $150. And then you also have like something like the B550 Steel Legend, which is also around, I think it's around the $150 mark. Those are all really good options. There's a ton of great options. My suggestion would be to go check out Linus Tech Tips forums for the motherboard tier list. I'll leave it in the link in the description box below. And I would go see, you know, how the VRMs are on each board. You won't really need a board that's super high end because you have a 3600, and it's not going to request that. It's not going to need that much. It's not going to be as hard on the VRM as like a 3950X would be. But it's better to have a system that you can upgrade and a motherboard that you can upgrade in the future if you decide you want to, than have a system that you're kind of stuck. The Pro 4 can handle the 3950X. It's just not going to be able to handle like overclocking it, and I wouldn't really suggest. I mean, you wouldn't really want to match these kind of board, you know, $115 board and a 3950X. You're probably not going to do that. You're probably, the most you'll probably match with this is like a 3900X or a 3700X. So I think the Pro 4 is perfect for that, or like the 4000 series replacement for the 3700 or the 3900X. But anyway, The Pro 4 is a great board. I've used it. I like it a lot. And I think it's a good option for $115. Again, I mentioned a ton of good options out here for the motherboards, so you can pick any of those, plus whatever else is good on the motherboard tier list. That's what my suggestion for this kind of build. Looking at the memory, memory is going to be an easy one, and I see this a lot in any of my builds. Get a 3200 or higher megahertz speed kit, 16 gigabytes at cast latency 16 or better. Now for this build, I put this Team Group T-Force Dark Z 16 gigabyte kit, 3200 megahertz and 16 cast latency. It's a fine kit. It's a pretty solid looking kit as well. I like the look of it, and it'll do you fine. But you can, again, put whatever kit you want in here. Just make sure it's good quality, has good reviews, and you're not going to have yourself, you're not going to have headaches with your memory failing or whatever. Do due diligence on your memory kit. You'll be perfectly fine. It's really kind of the easiest ones to buy. You can also get RGB for a little bit more, $15 more. You can get an RGB kit. So it's really up to you what you want aesthetically. Taking a look at storage, I do this in like almost every one of my builds. It's going to be a SSD and a hard drive split. So for this build, I would suggest getting a 480 500 gigabyte SSD for your boot drive, and then your favorite games and your favorite programs, stuff like that. And then I would also suggest grabbing a hard drive for all of your secondary games or your pictures and your videos and your that kind of stuff. And what's nice about this kind of system, if you get a 500 gig SSD, you can always get the hard drive later when you end up running out of room on your SSD. If you play Warzone, you'll probably end up filling that SSD really quickly, so you might have to get it quicker. But if you don't plan on playing that game or games that are super large in size, you probably could get a 500 gig SSD to last a little bit of time while you save up a little bit more money to get something like this 2 terabyte hard drive. We're going to skip on over the graphics card for a minute because we know what we're already buying, and we're going to move to the case. And the case that I chose for this build would be the vontech P300A Airflow. And I think the idea here is that the 3070 is going to be, it's a higher wattage, it's a higher TDP card. I think it comes in at 220 watts. So we don't know how the reviews are right now, but theoretically it's could be a little bit toastier depending on how well the cooler on the actual graphics card does for the chip. In any case, you want to make sure you have enough airflow. That's why I suggest the P300A. It's cheap. It has plenty of spots for extra fans, and it's designed for airflow. It's easy to build in. It's a nice case. I suggest it all the time. I have one right here that I'm modding for my son's Spider-Man build that I'm doing. If you guys watched my video a couple weeks ago. Now, if you don't want this case, there's a ton of alternatives that you can go for. You can go for the P400A, P500A. Both are great cases. The Fractal Design Mesh by C. I had the Dark Flash DLM21 non-mesh, but I would suggest getting the mesh version. All of these are going to be great options for the system. Now, if you get the Dark Flash one, that is a micro ATX case. Now, the one other downside of the DLM is that it doesn't come with a fan, so you'll have to make sure you get fans for that as well. Moving to the power supply, I think this is probably the most important part for this kind of build. You're getting a really nice graphics card and a really powerful graphics card that needs a lot of power too. So make sure you're not skimping on your power supply. I have a 650 watt EVGA B5 80 plus bronze units in my parts list. I would suggest checking out the PSU tier list on Linus Tech Tips forums, and then go from there, try to get a tier B or a tier A power supply. The problem with just saying, yes, get this one right here is that power supplies go out of stock very quickly, very often. So it's easier just to point you guys to that tier list and say, hey, check out there. Any of the tier B or higher will be good for you. Yes, it's going to cost you a little bit more money for a power supply like this, but then you know you are safe and you're not going to have your system blow up or something, and your 3070 get fried because you got a really crappy tier D power supply on that list, and it's just terrible, whatever. So make sure you get a nice power supply. I always recommend that, but especially at this point in time, get a tier B or tier A to make sure that your 3070 is in good shape. I will also leave the link to that tier list down in the description box below, so you can just go down there and you'll easily be able to get linked right to it. And then the last component of this whole entire build is the 3070. So I just threw in the Zotac version. You can get whatever one you want. The $500 price point is probably not going to be something that you actually see unless you get the Founders Edition. A lot of these cards are probably going to be a lot more expensive just because of demand off the bat. If you wait a couple months, it might go down a little bit. It really depends on how much stock there actually is for the 3070. I would grab whichever one performs well, has a cooler that performs well. So it's cool, so you're not dealing with heat issues, and one that is affordable. So in any case, that is my parts list for 3070. This is what I would put together minimally. This would be the base I would put together. I wouldn't buy anything cheaper, because then you don't want to have like all these, you don't want to have a cheap motherboard, cheap power supply, cheap case, all that kind of stuff. You know, if you can't afford to having good quality components around the 3070, probably should just wait for the 3060, so you have a just overall general better quality system. And I suggest that a lot. I don't like when my buddies come to me and ask me what type of system you should get, and they're like, well, I want the most performance, this, that, and they're like, well, let's get this motherboard that's $85 or $90, and I'm like, hold on, make sure that this is a good quality one before you buy it, because you don't want to have to go and replace it in a couple years because it's not doing what you want it to, or it's overheating, or whatever the case might be. And the total comes out for the system is going to come out to being $1,149 basically, so $1,150. It's actually really not a terrible price for this kind of build, and I'm actually kind of surprised that I was able to get a system around this price with everything that's included in here with the $500 3070. So that's if you're getting it for $500. And of course, you have to add tax depending on where you live and how much your area taxes you. If you guys like this kind of video, this theoretical parts list, give me a solid thumbs up. If you want me to do one for the 3080, or there's something else, something different that you would do in this parts list instead of what I put in here, let me know in the comments below. I appreciate you guys swinging in today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.